Good evening. Welcome to the Berks Bards, a virtual poetry reading series, coming to you live from someplace near Reading, Pennsylvania. I am your host, Bernardo. Tonight, we have a wonderful poet with a brand new book, Mr. Enzo Surin, who is going to present us with his fantastic work as part of his book tour. For right now, we're going to go over to Marilyn or Elizabeth to give us the highlights around the area.
Marilyn, take it.
He would ask me to do that. And I'm like, wait a minute. Oh, yeah. At this point, I don't know. Do we want to speak about how Berks Bards is changing leadership?
Yes, yes, I have your letter in front of me, Marilyn, and I appreciate that. Go ahead and say what we're about the transition.
Yeah, we're in the middle of transitioning because our main leaders for the past, I don't know, 10 to 15 years are starting to wear out, and for a variety of personal reasons need to install a new team to lead Berks Bards. So this is kind of a transition point, and we have not tried to plan into the future too far. We've still got a December poet, and I don't remember now who that is. Is it?
Tyler Barton is going to be the December poet, first Thursday in December. And then we may go to just an open mic Zoom into January, February, but we're not sure what comes after that. We're not sure what the new Berks Bards looks like. We're working on it.
Yeah, we've put out a call to our members and asked anybody who's interested in stepping forward, and we have gotten some responses. And come Saturday, we'll sit down with our current staff and make some decisions and try to see that the organization continues under new management. But the ladies who've applied, I'm pretty impressed with them. So I think we know what direction we're going to start to go in, but we'll see.
Is it always going to be Zoom?
I'm hoping we can go back to in person, because there's a large segment of people in Reading and in Berks County who really haven't come out much to the Zoom meetings. They see them once in a while, but yeah, we really need to be back and in person. Yeah. And we do have the go ahead from the Goggle Works, but we've got to put everything back into perspective. And just to give you an idea, I'm starting to move from doing my Poets Pause thing on Zoom to back in the studio. And it terrifies me to now depend on somebody to show up live, when that never used to bother me at all. Yeah. And now I'm terrified to go in person because I don't even know if they're going to show up. Zoom, I could fudge it.
All life. And everybody's had to go through something in their lifetime here on the earth, you know, some kind of famine, some kind of flood, and it's our turn.
Yeah, and the blessing is that, Enzo, the blessing is that we can have poets with us who are from far away, and you just have to go to your living room or your den or whatever and join us. So, and Anne and Patty and Bernardo, we're so glad that you can be with us and be leading us, Bernardo. And again, you're in your house, you know, you don't have to travel. So that's been a blessing.
Very cool. Speaking of announcements, I understand, Anne, I saw something about you've got a link out. If you want to put that in the chat, please do so, so we can continue to follow you and see what you're saying. And Patty, the tour that you're talking about coming up on the 21st, please put that in the chat as well, so that we can follow that as well. We're all here are poet enthusiasts. Now, with that being said, are there any other announcements? Well, let's meet Enzo. How about that? Enzo Silon is a Haitian-born poet, playwright, educator, publisher, and social advocate. He is the author of 3 collections of poetry, including When My Body Was a Clenched Fist. I love that title. That's on Black Lawrence Press 2020, and a chapbook, A Letter of Resignation, an American Librito in 2017. He's a recipient of a Brother Thomas Fellowship from the Boston Foundation, a Penn New England Discovery Award, and a Dennis Diedro AIR grant as artist in resident at Chateau de, or however you say that, or Quix in France. He teaches creative writing and literature at Bunker Hill Community College and is also founding editor and publisher of the Central Square Press and president executive director of the Faraday Publishing Company, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to educate, mobilize resources, and act as a catalyst of change. Welcome, Enzo.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited. As I was telling before we got started, that this is the first reading of the new season of my book tour, and so I'm excited to be starting it this way. Berks Bards has been on my calendar for a very long time, and and it seemed like the pandemic was going to push it, keep pushing the dates. But I'm glad that we're able to get this on the books. I'm excited, and I'm extremely excited to be sharing poems from my book, When My Body Was a Clenched Fist. I'll talk a little bit in between the poems in terms of inspiration, but I'll try to be brief in that. But I do want to start with the premise of the fist as a metaphor, and so I will be reading 5 poems to get started, and each poem will be representing a digit. And so you get a sense of how the metaphor of the fist came together. One guide that I offer folks when reading this book is that any 5 poems can be read together, and you still get the essence of the elements of the fist. And so I'll be reading. The first poem I'll be reading is a poem titled "Elegy for 161st Street," which really starts us at the starting point of the affliction of the fist. And I grew up in Jamaica, Queens, New York, and so it makes sense to start with that. So Elegy for 161st Street, which is the block that I grew up on in Jamaica, Queens. 5 furious years after Grandmaster Flash penned a rap about edges, you zigzagged the corners on Run from Benson and Hedges, back when the zeitgeist of the block was crack and your father had that used pale blue Pontiac he would dash the family into on Friday nights, trying to counter the myopic pull of the block's high danger of dope fiends and the debilitating euphoria in a whimsical gaze waylaid like mazes. You sat in the back seat and uttered under your breath, why would anyone ever trade in nights under palm trees for these calm nights? For the menacing overtone of a smile without teeth? Because you've come to learn the most important lesson is to master your own strut and gaze for the days when soon you'd be spit back onto the same strip of block where twice a woman with eyes belonging to that dragged out and quintessential gaze proffered you an act of fellatio for $5. You were 10 years old on an errand to buy a milk in a flagellous galaxy, but carried the weight of her bid on all future runs to the grocery store when the concrete sparkled like a sky full of stars under your feet. You were grateful then for the drift of Friday nights, when street telemetry took a back seat to the only sign of life, a magnificent breeze against your face. That particular poem was written around a time where the crack epidemic was really taking over in Queens, New York, and so it's around late '80s, mid to late '80s, and even as a kid, I was witnessing a lot of these things. And one of the things that I realized early on is that how observant I was about some of these things around me, and of course, I learned very early on that when they declare war on drugs, it was really a war on people on drugs, because here was this older woman um, soliciting a young kid because she needed money for drugs. And so it became one of the ways that I started to document it. And you may have picked up some rhythm even in the poems as well. And so a lot of music was infused into this because, rap music, hip hop was coming of age at the same time in Queens, New York. And so I was able to find a way to infuse the music, right, into this because that was the rhythm that was going on. And my dad would usher us in his car, on Friday nights just to get us out of the neighborhood. But it didn't mean that we couldn't see what was going on. And so that particular experience stayed with me. And I wanted to start with that because, that block, I got to see a lot of different things and I got to see how people suffered. And really wanted to document that. But to get the real essence of the clenched fist metaphor, we have to start with the title poem of this collection. And it's a great place to start because, and I'll only be reading 3 sections from it, but it is a 5-section poem. Each section represents, again, a digit of the fist. But it's a good place to start because you start to see the transformation of the fist. Now, a quick word about that poem is that I used to watch a lot of X-Men, and read a lot of cartoons, the comic strips, and so forth. And one of the things I was obsessed with was the life of a mutant. How did they gain their power, right? How did that happen? And I realized that the way a mutant gained their power, and it could be, Spider-Man, being stung by a spider and so forth, that trauma also afflicts us in that way. And sometimes we don't necessarily know what happens. And so you start to feel funny at the original affliction, and you sort of go through the process. And so I really grouped this poem and I titled each section of it based on the aspects of a mutation because trauma does that to the body. And so the first section is affliction, the second one is aftermath, the third section is metamorphosis, the fourth section is retaliation, and then the last section is revolution. And so, and I always say that I'll read the first 3, but then something happens as I start to read the poem. And so if it gains momentum and you say, oh, he's reading on, it's because the poem wants to be read fully. Sometimes it wants to stop. So I'll start with the first section of My Body as a Clenched Fist. 1. Affliction. It was a gust, no, a burst of air that brought the coil to my hand time and again. And no matter what I did to flex, it didn't budge. And almost always brought me back to Leon walking beside me. Then in one svelte motion, not there, except for the treads of his shoes making its way down the street he didn't know was a one-way, the wrong way. When he doubled back, it was clear that something cannibalized the way home. I vetted the treetops for a place to perch, a vantage point, beyond the crowd that had gathered to watch the fight, but there was no fight. It was all one-sided. 7, strike that. 10, strike that. 18, strike that. 20 pair of fists and Timberland boots bear down into the boy, and the only side of fighting him with his body balling up like a fist to brace the rush of even more fists. What could I do? What could I have done? They had begun to also cannibalize passers-by and onlooker. I did what was customary, collected faces for the diurnal course when there'd be another way to put fears and the cheers into a vista that wouldn't involve more fists. That day never came. And when a fury this strong begins to court a young fist, when anger's calibrated with fondness for rancor, there is only one end. To fight monsters, you must yourself become a monster. 2. Aftermath. There was no sign it ever took place, no dents in the universe, no visible wounds from where the paratroopers landed their blows, no traces of Leon, no parallel bruise in your ribs or spine, just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sun. No physical wreckage, shards of bone, no raging fire or smoldering carcass, just an echo in your bones and veins, in the fist you packed for the day, just sun, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sun. No shortcuts. Same streets, same trees, and you staring at yourself like the body's purpose was to harbor this universe of cavity wide enough to muse. Maybe there was still a way, so certain there was still a way to walk away or undo what was done, but with no body, no witnesses, no one to talk to, no Leon back at school, no sign the universe was ever disturbed except in your bones and in the loaded fists you carried in your pocket. You sat in class, reviewed homework like you always did, later at recess in that odd, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sun, whispering to the ball in your hands, shot taker and rebounder, because even at 13, you already knew that sometimes teeth are a gateway to the city of one's understanding, and other time they are a gate for what ails, and with no credible witness to corroborate other than your own reflection in storefront windows, the ceaseless parading of two bodies, a balancing double-barrel pair of fists, you settled into the glaring aftermath, alone, glazed in that beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sun. Metamorphosis. When a burst of air is enough to make your hand tremble, or when the wake in your jaw is from sharpening one tooth against another in your sleep, to face a teeth-to-cheek world that brings clots, hunger to jawbone blocks, you realize no part of the body is immune, not even air in your lungs. The pressure and heat across the fear and sorrow of trying to walk away that day had fused to your DNA. First heat and first pressure came when the first swing of first Timberland boots or knockoffs, the same width, the same assault on the chest. When Leon gasped, you gasped. And when he flinched, you flinched. The weight alone of boots on his ribs should have killed him, but didn't. Though something callous that day, conjoined, and when the crowd broke away, you broke too. One version went home, did his homework, and was good. The other still on the lawn, trying to be less like a young bird perched on that brazening through the boreal climate and the body's consequent retaliation. In one body, there is a boy fleeting. In another, you are that boy, ratifying the way back home on that paltry afternoon in that airing, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sun, when your body's genesis of an open and close season exposed the hours of expand and constrict until all that was left was the index finger, primed its new delegation as terminal member. In a lot of ways, witnessing what happened to this friend who was 1 second next to me, and then was what this described was he was being jumped by a group of people, and there's a split that happened, right? I mean, later on, you start to learn that you learn words like disassociation, right? Because you're trying to make sense of things. Did this really happen? Maybe if I can go back, and you play that over in your head, thinking maybe there's something I could have done. To change things. Maybe things could be a lot different, and then you realize that's when the trauma has really started to change you, and you notice no one can tell you any different, but yet you can't really relay that information to anyone, because how do you explain that? How do you explain what's happening to you? And so a lot of this book really talks about how there are many other fists, just like me, young fist, right? And I call this fist because we don't necessarily show up on the stats. We weren't loud. We weren't creating trouble in school. And so we didn't show up on anyone's radar, but we're quietly suffering with anxiety, with some of these exposures to trauma. And no one really knew what to do with us. And so a lot of this book is really for other young fists so that their voices could be heard and their experiences could be brought to light, because it's still happening. It's really tough to find resources really geared towards folks who are what I call folded in these broken spaces. And so this particular poem itself really connects to a few of the other poems. And one of them is a poem titled In a Fisted Universe. Because in this particular poem deals with witnessing a fight, but this fight was kind of unusual, because a lot of times when when you describe these moments, unlike the jumping that happened, some of these fights were actually scheduled, almost like bouts, which was crazy, right? And so people thought, oh, it was all chaotic. People, no, they would show up. They'll say, hey, let's meet in this place. You bring your people, and I'll bring my people, and we're going to settle our disputes that way. And there were rules and regulations to it, and no one broke the rules, as if they were already indoctrinated into this universe and these rules. And so I always thought it was odd. And so in this particular poem, In a Fisted Universe, I sort of document what it was like to witness that, but at the same time, what it meant for me as a witness, in such a thing, and how much it changed me. So, in a fisted universe, would have thought we were trained for the shots we took. Fists tossed into the blind bend of neck and shoulder, where truth held more misses than hits, most of which was more show than blow. Sometimes, as if on cue, a spot broke open in the crowd amidst drawl and grimace, and the withdrawn drew their card into the dark matter of an ever after. Triumph or defeat, no one ever cried, as if the body only attended to the tear and break and not to tears. Most of these bouts staged in empty school lots, fists flaring their stellar remnants, begot not one bona fide winner. Fight within as bitter as any in the ring. And the one thing that always survived were lies told about whose fists were hindmost. Not how easily hearts under guard went into flip mode over a fresh pair of white sneakers, and how some were eager to pledge homage to a posse. Didn't matter the cause or if one really believed in the push of fists over bodies. One day you'd be next. And some years from this moment, the sound of something breaking or some poor boy's plea will awaken lessons learned in science class about sound travel in space, myths of how one can witness the destruction of the world without hearing a single sound, how one can wail, 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 and no one be able to hear it, but you know this to be claptrap. In space or backlot, you can always hear the blare of your own ruin. And this particular poem really addresses the idea that if you spend enough time, you can actually see to the end of every fight. But not only that, what your life would be like after that, or not, right? And so you can always tell who would follow the rules and who would actually be upset at losing, and then they take, they have a problem, and then they bring more people, and then eventually, guns started to show up simply because the rules started to change. And so in a really interesting way, especially that last line, it's about the cries, right? It's about the internal cries to know that at some point you're going to be next. Your name is going to be called. And at any given time, someone could be indoctrinated into that kind of life. And so this is really writing these poems for people who didn't necessarily go into that life because they decided not to do it. But one of the lines that I have in one of the poems is that no matter what, everybody dies in the streets. And so you had to really kill a part of yourself that wanted to retaliate, that wanted to get involved in that in order to survive. And that meant, again, that two versions of yourself, right? The part that does homework and goes home and is a good kid. And then the other part that that really has a tough and outer, to protect yourself, right? To make sure that you weren't subjected to intimidation and so forth. And I carried that with me. And the reason why I carried that with me was my two boys, one who's 8, the other one who's 3. They are my world. They are the cutest, most loving, sensitive, cuddlers in the world, right? And I often think about when I'm giggling with them on the floor how, we talk about the fist, the metaphor of that, and the fist does represent an outward gesture, right, to fight. But at the same time, if you think about a possession, if you really value something, you're going to hold it tight, right? And so we hold fists all the time. And so for me, it was to protect what was inside, right? Because I knew I wanted to be a dad one day. I knew I was a sensitive kid. I'm still a sensitive adult, you know. I knew I wanted to keep that loving part of myself alive in this really tough environment. So the fist was really to protect that. And that's the reason why my book tour is called the Open Hand Tour, because it's really about celebrating what it feels like to be open now as a result of surviving this. I do want to, I'm not sure I'm doing with time. I do want to read one more poem, or do I have time for two? So, what's that? One more?
I said, go for it. They got,
Okay.
I don't see a lot of open mic stuff out there, so go ahead and
Okay,
go.
wonderful. So this next poem is a poem titled Pathology of a Fist. And at some point I mentioned disassociation. And at some point when you look back, you start to ask yourself, did I really grow up in this? Did I really survive this? Did that really happen? And do people actually, survive in these places? And so this poem is really, addressing the idea of hypomnesia, which is the essence of you're trying to make sense of something, but you don't know if it's true or not. Did this really happen? But then the memories come back and you see yourself there, right? And so this poem is really not trying to address anything other than questions. It's the mind questioning itself as I try to make sense of things. So, pathology of a clenched fist. Who rode the blue streak of the Q44 bus through Flushing's Cove Meadows? Hopped the chain link to the narrow graffitied alleyway to empty parks, where dangled without nets, tortured rims dubbed as an altar for malice? Who stroked a tireless calm on Linden Boulevard's canvas? That nod for consensus, drew a clearing for larynx, and a wide way leading out, called it road? Who airbrushed winter's brief overcomb over body's pallid streaks? Who blotted up the steam of subway grates, righted the somber cabless wave, grazed fingers with guile, amber, minded the dab of calico corners in claret, and traced the library of Jamaica's gnome-filled streets, graved them, upholstered framed, and called this home? Who? And it was really asking who created this environment, right? Like, how did this come to be? And how did this come to be everyone's reality in that sense? And of course, depending on who you ask, you'll get a different set of answers about why this came to be, and including blaming those who grew up in that environment. And so the last poem I want to read is a poem that really addresses, because I do address social violence. And I grew up in Haiti before coming to the United States, to living in Jamaica, Queens. And so there was political violence there that forced us to leave. And so I came, I mentioned the social violence and the drugs and everything else. But there was another force that was harassing us, especially the kids who weren't trying to be in trouble. And that was the police. And so when I mentioned that when they declared a war on people on drugs, it didn't matter if you were on drugs, if you were dealing drugs. If you were in a neighborhood that was affected by it, everybody got harassed. And this is a poem of my first encounter with the police. And it wasn't the last. And it sort of really chronicles what it feels like to not feel safe on either side. And so when someone says, are you going to call the police if somebody is harassing you? And this kind of answers that question. Up Against the Wall, 94. Years gone by, and don't give them a reason is all that you can say. Still, words don't come easy. When the interrogation lasts longer than the actual minute it should take for hands to make their way around and down your chest. When the weight of both penis and pistol pushed against your back distracts you from the other pair of hands between your thighs and hot breaths, so close you feel moisture dewing on your cheek and can make out both what they had for lunch and the tang of aged urine and sweat on the wall. When you can't see but feel eyes clocking your arraignment, and the city behind you feels like a gone world, and your weeping becomes a dreary lake in a valley of pimples. When you know looking like someone who fits the description is another way of saying they can do this and there is nothing you can do about it. And when an engram of an apology fails to greet you after, not the first, nor the second time, nor the third, you know the person who fits the description will always be you. Thank you very much. I do want to pause here to see if there's any questions. I do
That
want
would
to.
be fire. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to interrupt your thing, but damn, you just brought me home like a long ways. I'm sorry, y'all. Okay. I'm sorry, Bernardo. I'm sorry. I'm gonna be quiet.
Thank you.
Well, I think my man asked if anybody had any questions or comments. This would be a wonderful time to go ahead and let him know. Brother, let me tell you something, man. You took me back.
Yes.
Yeah.
I too am a very sensitive guy, and I've been sensitive, and I went to Catholic school, and at the same time I was living in the projects. So I'm dealing with them two different worlds, man. How do I
Right.
stay with the books? And
Right.
Jesus said that to give me a cloak and treat others like it. And then I get off the bus and somebody want to steal me in the face because you think you're better than me because you got time. Man, I don't know nothing. I'm a kid.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
just trying to go home.
Yes.
Brother,
Hey.
you told the story so well.
Yes. Yes.
I gotta get
Bernardo,
that book.
I
Gotta
got
get
my
that book.
ass kicked at 16th and K underneath a streetcar. My girls had to get off the bus behind me to try to save me. Okay. And we ran over to this bank, and the white lady in the bank was like, "No, you're not coming in here." I'm like freaking bleeding. The guy in the insurance company, white guy in the insurance company, let us in his office. My mother came. I got my ass kicked in 16th and K. Can you believe that?
Wow.
Oh,
In
wow.
DC, yes. And so, Enzo, you brought back like so much stuff. I think I put in there first time I ever had a cigarette, me and Damiana Redmond on the, had a fight. Her brother jumps in, right? You know this, Enzo. You know this stuff happens, right? And my girl, I don't even know I can't even think of her name right now, but it cracks me up because I remember her going, no, ain't no dude gonna fight no girl. And then she's like fighting him, kicks his ass. We get on the D2 bus and she's like, and I'm like all nervous and everything. And she's like, here, girl, take a smoke and relax, right? And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I love this. Please put in where I can get your book because I absolutely love it. And your reading was phenomenal. I would love to have you come to Maryland. Like, oh my gosh, it was so good. Thank you so much for that. It was almost like a release of the trauma because you're right. When you are standing there, I mean, let me tell you, I was standing on Wisconsin Avenue waiting for the 30 bus with Bridget Ford and Michelle. I don't know how the heck she did it because she was on the other side of the street. In some kind of way, she ran over and stole Bridget in the face, and Bridget she's standing right next to me and fell to the ground. And blood was everywhere. And I was just like, oh my God. And when you started reading your poems, it just really started bringing everything back. And this was so I'm about 10 years older than you are. So it was in the 70s that was going on. And I mean, I really appreciated what you brought there. So thank you so much for that. I'm sorry. And I'm sorry to just burst out, you guys, but that was like therapy to me. I mean, Elizabeth, that was like therapy to me. Thank you so much. There was something working on me all day that was like, you got to make this tonight. You got to make this tonight. And I even set my alarm clock on the phone because I was like, you got to make it tonight. And that was it. So thank you all so much.
I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here, Patty.
Yeah, me too.
I
Thank
put the
you.
link in the chat where you can get the book. And the particular link is, to get a signed copy of it. and so you'll be able to order that. But I think it validates a lot of this experience just to hear you echo this, right? I think at some point, the question I often get is, how difficult was it to write this? And I said it was one of the most difficult collections to write, because I had to relive a lot of these experiences over, to be able to chronicle what happened and to write them in a very authentic way. And in doing so, though, because I've never been the type to be afraid of doing the work, right? And by doing the work, I mean, I didn't just write as therapy. I said poetry is therapeutic, but poetry is not therapy, right? That you need a team. And so I did do counseling. I did do, have therapists to be able to process some of this.
Yeah.
And I was always obsessed with psychology. That was my major, but I was reading psychosomatic books,
Wow.
for fun, while people in high school, right? Because I wanted to understand my body. Like, can you actually make yourself sick? And I said, yeah, your mind can actually make you feel sick,
Yeah.
because of the stress,
Yeah.
because of the anxiety.
Yes.
And so it was important for me to merge both of those passions, to say, you know what, how can I heal myself, but at the same time bring something that that will resonate with other people. And I think that's what got me over. Because I said, why am I doing this? And I said, well, maybe there's one person, there's one kid who this might connect with. And that's why hearing, like, you even named the street, Patty, right?
Yeah.
And
I'm
well, now
telling
you talked about the tie, like you remember the exact words that were said,
yeah.
right? Because these things happen and they stay in us. And our body and really the metamorphosis of the fist is that the body tucks itself into a fist and try to protect itself, and the anxiety and all sorts of other things start to happen, and you can't explain it. And so I kind of mentioned that I feel like I'm the healthiest I've ever been in my entire life, physically, mentally, emotionally, and so forth, as a result of going through the process of not just writing the book, but to be able to share it and to know that it touches other people from all sorts of walks of life, it's amazing. So thank you for sharing that, because it definitely feeds me too.
Oh yeah, I already bought the book. I just went and bought it just now.
Wow,
So
you're
you just
quick.
sold one. Yeah. I already
quick.
did it. PayPal. Yep. Hey, I got
All
my
right.
phone right here. I already did the PayPal. I was like, I need that book. I mean, it's truly, like you said, it not only did it validate, but it validates for me too, right? Because like, I'm like, damn, and just some amazing stories that you told there that just reminded me so much of, I grew up in DC, and I went to school though over in Georgetown. So I went to, a good public school, right?
Yeah.
Like, but I had to take the bus, right? And sometimes catch two buses and transfer, and you're going from one neighborhood. And the crazy thing is when you start talking about Leon, like Leon in my neighborhood. So first of all, Leon in my neighborhood was crazy. He went to kind of high school a little bit, but I gotta love Leon because Leon was the one person that would keep the rest of the guys off of me. Right. So when I was walking down the street, Leon would be, nah, man, leave her. I know Patty. Right. And so it was like so cool. And later on in life, they did a special for the Washington Post on the brothers at Lorton, right? The prison that's down in Virginia. And why is Leon in the middle of this damn, they're in this picture and there's Leon. And I'm like, my man, and I know he's in prison, but he's like, probably trying to help somebody out. But I was just like, wow. And so that was really, so when you talked about that as well, it's true. I mean, the whole, pistols and the penis is like, and we don't, like, to me, you see that because you're around it, right? So you see people get arrested, like, when you're young, you see this, but man, you brought in the true feeling of what happens when that happens, right? That touch, right? You don't think about that. You were freaking touching my body, like with every part and every sort of part of your body that should not be touching my body, right? And that's what I loved about that poem, is because that poem really put it in the face of people and said, look, this is some bullshit. This should not be happening, right? And young boys should not be going through that. And I remember reading an article where there was a town where they used to automatically arrest all the young boys so that they could get a record of them. So that because their idea was later on in life, these brothers are going to do something and we want to already have them on file, right?
Oh my, wow.
And so, I mean, it was amazing. I'm so glad I tuned in. I'm sorry, guys. Okay, I'm going to mute myself because I'm.
And that particular poem or that particular experience, I remember thinking, what do I do now, right? I was actually on my way to work. I worked at the Queensboro Public Library. That was my first job, right? Of course, it had to be, right? As a poet, as a writer.
Right,
That was
exactly.
fitting.
Yeah.
And what happened right before that was I was on the school bus, because I went to school in Flushing, and you know, get on the bus, and someone had gotten on the bus with one of those tasers, right?
Right.
And
So
so
they
they thought it
stopped
was fun to tase people, right, on the bus. And so at some point, the bus driver got wind of it and kicked everyone off the bus, right? I said, wait, I wasn't doing anything. You know, why are you putting me out there now? I'm going to be standing out there with these fools doing this, right? And I remember thinking, like, you know, finally being able to, and I was late for work. And so when I was walking, that's what I was on my mind. I said, now I'm late for work because of that bus incident. And then that happened with the police. And so I was shook from that too, right?
Right.
And when I got into my work, as I was about to go in, they followed me in like a new group of officers, right? It wasn't like they radioed to each other. It wasn't him.
Right.
And so they followed, when I say followed, like they went in the main door and then I went behind the desk and I had to go down the stairs, like to go check in. And they were following me all the way down.
To
And
make
so
sure
now,
you checked in.
and so I was like, okay, what is it? They already stopped me out there. They already cleared me. And they said, oh, we just want to make sure, you know.
Right.
And so then they searched me at my job. And so then all my coworkers and my boss, everybody is looking at you. And all of a sudden, even if you're innocent in that moment, it's that, you know, that line about everybody's already judging you, right? And so all of a sudden, they're arresting you with their eyes. They're, you know, judging you and they're sentencing you, right? He must have been up to something. I mean, why would the police, you know, come after you? And so it became one of those things that it wasn't necessarily, I needed to protect myself in a lot of ways from everything because I didn't want that to jade me. I didn't want that to change my perception of police in general or the reason for police, you know. My best friend is a detective, police detective, and we always have these conversations. He grew up in the Bronx, you know, similar experience. And we didn't meet till we were in college here in Massachusetts, right? But we talk about those experiences and how we have to be different than what's out there. But to be different, you have to be able to protect. And not a lot of folks made it, you know. Some ended
Right.
up in
Because it
jail,
works on,
you
it
know,
works on your
some,
mind. You got to be able to do what you said. You got to be able to have two versions of yourself, right? And you got to be able to see that in your mind. I mean, that was amazing to me when you said that, because it made me realize, like, oh yeah, that's what I've been able to do. And I think they talk about that some, but like with compartmentalizing. I don't know if that's
it is.
something that they
That's what it's called,
is it,
compartmentalized.
Yeah.
yeah.
And you have to. And we become, you know, I mean, in general, in terms of being, because you mentioned, it was interesting that you mentioned race as well in describing the people that, because you do compartmentalize, you do try to figure out in America whether or not you're safe, right? And I always talk about the image of the black man in America and how I was always had to balance that, right? Where I'm being perceived as a threat. So in certain areas, it's like, who am I, right? How much of a smile can I present, right, to make people feel safe enough to, you know? And I was like, I was a mama's boy. I
Yeah.
love my mom, like sensitive kid, you know, and who works at a library, you know, and who
Can
brought
I
his
ask you a
paper.
question,
Yes,
Enzo? Is
yes,
that other incident, is that also in your book as well, about the police officers?
yes. The one that I just read. Yes, up against the
Yeah.
wall, 94. Yep.
Okay, well, see, I'm kind of wondering now, and if anybody else has any questions, please raise your hand so I can see you and then call on you
Yep.
while we got this time with Enzo. Um, but I was thinking, when did you write these poems? Were these poems a result of notations you wrote? Like, I got a notepad, and sometimes I'll write a quick note because of what I'm experiencing, and then later on I'll come back and look at it, and then I will remember, and then I will add to it, and it turns into something.
Yeah.
So how would you write yours? What was your
That's a very good question, Bernardo. I feel like I was carrying those poems in my body like the entire time and in my mind because I had these memories, right? And again, I was fighting with them, saying, "Did this didn't really happen?" But two memories stood out to me, which is the one that I shared with you, and that when my body in the title poem. The other one is actually my first chapbook is a book called Higher Ground. It's currently it's out of print now, but it was through Finishing Line Press. But I addressed um, one of my friends from high school was killed, and I think it was right around the time where I was trying to get out of, out of high school, and I was trying to figure out how do I address this because that's something that I've carried for a very long time, and I wanted to put that particular memory. I wanted to free myself of it, or put that memory out in the world, right? So I wrote this poem, and it was a sequence poem. And when I was in grad school, my my mentor said, "You seem to be writing. All these poems seem to be about the same person. They're about Frankie." And I said, "Yes, you're right." And so we started to flush some of these things out, right? And I realized that in writing these poems, and there's a few poems titled "Elegy for Frankie" in this manuscript, right? I mean, in this book. And at the time, at the manuscript, I was thinking, how do I include? What else can I include? And I realized those were the two pillars. What happened with Leon, which happened in junior high school, and then what happened with Frankie, which happened in high school. And he was just like, actually, I'm going to read a poem titled Passport to Brooklyn that really chronicles some of that experience, Bernardo, since you mentioned it.
Can we close with that right now?
Oh, yes.
Anybody have any questions at this
Yes.
point? If nobody has any questions, I'd like to encourage you to put your name into the chat if you want to read a poem. Okay. And having said that, do we have any questions? Marilyn, you normally ask a question or two, don't you?
Yeah, just a quick comment. I know two individuals who've had rough and tumble experiences as kids. One is my husband, who grew up in Phoenixville. It was just a steel town. And he describes being a little fat kid and with glasses. And he describes his best friend trying to get into a gang and associate himself with a gang, and he was told, his best friend was told to beat him up, and how a part of him died when he grabbed him by the back of the neck and rammed his head into the wall, and the other is a dear friend from another writers group who's in his 80s, and he's had a career as an attorney, and he's retired now. But he was one of those street fighters, one of those kids who was chosen to go fight with so and so. And I try to understand what that world is, because I didn't experience that kind of thing, but I certainly know people who did.
Yeah, I've seen it from both ends. I've been jumped, set up, walked away from some things, ducked and hide. And I was thinking about what you were saying about the becoming two people. There's also another thing besides being compartmentalized. There's also the idea of being fractured.
Yes.
It's an idea of a glass just dropping and it breaks into all the different pieces.
Mhm.
And try to put all the pieces back together to make it whole.
Yeah.
It's so difficult. Matter of fact, let me write that down because it sounds like a poem idea.
Oh yeah, I was about to tell you that. I was like, the way you described it, I said, you better write that poem. Yes.
Any other
It-
questions?
yeah.
And you good? All right. Okay. I don't see anybody's name in this open, setting up for open mic. So why don't you go ahead and read the next poem, Enzo?
Okay. Well, I did mention the poem about Frankie that I was going to read. I'll briefly mention because I had a different poem that I'm gonna close with because I think that poem speaks volume as to how I even made it out, right? And because of what you just said in terms of the shattered glasses, Ronaldo, like, what kept me together? What kept me going, right? Besides doing things for myself, and it's a poem titled on Sunday autumn afternoons in Jamaica, Queens. And the reason why I want to read it is because around this time of year, anytime fall comes around, I'm reminded of those Sunday afternoons where, as a group, we all got together to play football at a local park. And it didn't matter which block you were from, or what beef anyone had that day or that week. Everyone came to play football. And it was really the only time that you got to see kids be kids. And sometimes we'd even switch sides. So you'd be playing next to someone who during the week that crew may have a problem with, right? And it was those moments that I held on to because it made me see, it reminded me that we were all kids and that we're all human beings and we were put into this space where we had to really fight and fighting for ourselves, fighting against each other, fighting the system. And so it was a beautiful moment that I wanted to capture, and it is really a love poem for New York City and all the clenched fists that I came in touch with. And so I do want to close out with on Sunday autumn afternoons in Jamaica, Queens. We trusted our bodies cutting into the fat, bold air, and hand-me-down layers, pigskin against our ribs like a Hughes-weighted dream. No pads, no helmet for the journey of grabs and leaps. We toiled until the field faded, and alone and out of breath, we talked and laughed, waited, the accumulation of out and gone days. Some of the things we never said, as if this would carry into real life. Thank you so much for giving me the space and the opportunity to share these poems.
Yes.
Thank you, Berks Bard. I was looking forward to this for a very long time, and thank you, folks, for spending your Thursday night with me and listening to these poems and these stories that inspired them.
Is that your closing poem, my friend?
Yes.
Oh no.
Oh, you want another?
Hold on a second. Hold on a second.
You want another?
Let me find something. Let me find this thing for you. Because I feel like we had so much of the similar experiences, man. It's almost like one of those movies where you see
Yeah.
somebody coming from a universe where
Yes.
this is happening over here, and in parallel and concert with this is happening over there.
Yes.
And it's such an awesome. I'm trying to find this poem, man, because I got to share one with you.
Oh, yes.
Nobody wants to read, but
I'll read. I actually have one I want to read. I actually have one I want to read.
Hold on a second. I just want to send it saying from one poetic brother to another, I've got to share something with you. You've given me so much.
Well, I appreciate
I'm going to do that. So Patty, why don't you go ahead? Patty, if yours is ready, why don't you go ahead and read yours, and then I will look for mine and read after you.
Okay. I'm not sure if I've read. I'm not sure if I read this poem before for you guys, but I really want to read it. So it's called 13 Blues. I lived behind churches, fried chicken, hated the smell of used grease and rotten potatoes, but loved the $2 special on Tuesday night. It was better than Sunday dinner. How do I tell this story? I used to stay out late as possible, sneaking in past the lamplight as if on a mission impossible. I passed the door that never opens and ascend to the small bedroom upstairs. There hope lies in. The closed room downstairs, not for me. My mother dripping in her boyfriend's reality. How do I tell this story? Miss Francis, the neighbor, tried twice to burn her house down, her kids inside. She said it was too hard to feed them. She loved them enough not to leave them. So she set herself on fire, screaming at a world that lacked the understanding of her baby boys' names. King James, Duke Edward, Prince Peter. Rest in peace. How do I tell this story? Understanding, misunderstood. I had a single mother who only threw matches when she was certain to burn something down, but never willing to burn down anything for me. She could not see my burning desire to be seen. At 13, I was learning the blues. I tried my best to make no requests. I knew one ride on the back of his motorcycle was worth more than decorating my room. My thoughts, my opinions didn't matter. It was a matter of a fact that I was fortunate to have the roof over my head, and any talk that was different was dead. So how do I tell this story? As she eased back downstairs to his bed, I laid in mine and began to realize that he and everything else would take a precedent over my presence. I was a guarantee. So like a $2 box of chicken on Tuesdays, I would always be right there on the menu. How do I tell this story? Mama, I was the one who loved you. That's it. You took me there, Enzo. You took me there.
I love the repetition in that piece. You know,
Thank you.
in the ways trauma works that way. It's in cycles, right? And then you keep asking the same question: How do I tell this story?
Yeah.
How do I?
How do I tell it?
Will anyone believe me? Right? And then will
Right.
I believe me? You know?
Yeah, because it's amazing. Like that part of my life, I'm not sure if I really.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing about it was, when we lived where we lived, my mom used to rent out rooms to people. And the crazy thing is, to this, I just got her to realize that, yeah, that was like some dangerous shit. And that was really a boarding house. Right? Like she didn't even get that, right? And I'm like, yeah, like I think you need to think about that. Like, you know, and I did live behind Church's Fried Chicken, and I got teased on the bus for it.
There's so much to life, Patty. I mean, in this relationships, there's your relationship to Church's Chicken, there's your relationship to your mother, there's your relationship to the guy on the motorcycle. And we're trying to make sense of all of this. So yeah, it definitely becomes a thing of how do I tell a story, because there's so much to tell, you know, and you probably still got more that you could tell about it, you know.
I think y'all are right. Yeah, probably need to work on that one.
I see Elizabeth said she wanted to share a poem. Elizabeth, do you want to share one now? Do you want to wait for after me? What do you want to do?
Your choice, Bernardo. You can go. Go ahead.
Well, I'm the host here, my sister.
Oh,
So
okay. All right. Can I squeak this in?
Go ahead.
Squeak this in? Okay. All right. So this is from a line that popped into my head. As you may have been thinking the last 20 some months, death is on my radar. My own death, friends' deaths, the thousands of people, millions of people who've died. I translate that into looking at nature, and I was listening to dried seed pods on the mimosa. These are long dried pods, and they shake in the wind and they rattle like bones rattling. So this came out of that, and it has a well, it's called Elegy for Tree. Dried seed pods rattle in late October wind, mimosas dying. Squirrel finds no shelter from pelting rain, bark scarred, mimosas dying. Where are the sparrows to hunt and peck for insects? Mimosas dying. tree perfumed the air, feathered blossoms last July, mimosas dying. Limbs, leaves, bark, and roots, letting go of earth and time, mimosas dying.
Yes.
I see you bringing up the performance poetry energy there. Miss.
Yes. I love it.
I kept wondering where the bell's coming from. Wait a minute, hold up.
I thought it was
Yeah.
me too, so I
Did
knew.
you hear,
Yes.
did you hear the bell?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, it's a chalice
Yes.
and
Yes.
a letter opener.
Yeah. There you go, baby. Bring it. Bring it.
See. I love it. I love it.
And
Okay.
this, there's a backstory, just a quick backstory. This chalice, this pewter chalice was given to me by my husband, who passed away in 1997. It says he had it etched or inscribed. Ist es nicht wunderbar, dass wir doch zusammengekommen sind? Isn't it wonderful that we have come together?
Oh,
Of that.
that's beautiful. I love that.
That applies tonight. I'm so
Wow.
glad I met you, Enzo.
I feel like it's a poetry party that's about to start.
It is. This
I
is
don't feel like we're wrapping up. I feel like we're ramping
gosh.
up. I'm
We are.
excited.
Yes.
Like, who else got
Oh
something
my
to share?
gosh.
Oh,
Bernardo,
Lady
Enzo,
Di.
Thank you so
Oh, Lady
much.
Di.
Here is my poem of Kings and Mountains. When I was a kid, we played a game called King of the Mountain. Oh, I know some of you played the same game, only with a different name, maybe King of the Hill. But it really didn't matter because the kingdom was not real. At that time, it was about building our self-esteem. We were children with dreams, tall enough to reach the moon. We'd fall down, get up, resumed our quest to reach the top. We grabbed, we pushed, we shoved. Most of us were friends, caught up in wanting to win. Right then, it was not about the love. It was about those dreams of finding self-esteem atop an imaginary mountain in a society that blatantly treated us so mean, locked us down, watched us drown, tossed us to be lost, never to be found. In this land of freedom, there was this bold-faced evil, separate but equal, but it was not. If it was hot in some park you got to play in, you couldn't even quench your thirst. More than the discomfort of no water was the hurt, facing a sign blind to your existence, denigrating your worth. So we played games where we might be on top. There we might be able to cause the disgrace to stop, to chase the title, the position, the acclaim as a child, finding a state of being worthwhile in a game. To have to reach past this ridicule, to face this refrain for years. Imagine the frustration, the anger, the tears. And one day there appeared a king, talked about mountains. He said some wonderful things about them, how freedom would ring from a stone mountain in Georgia to Lookout Mountain in Tennessee. He named their names, he made them real. The Rockies and the Alleghenies would proclaim us to be free. He restored our dreams on that day in '63. On that day, a dream was planted. I would not have to play king of the mountain for the rest of my life in order to find peace. He spoke, and I believed if I tried, I might succeed, all because a king spoke of mountains.
Well, go ahead, Bernardo. Fire.
Wow. I can see why you wanted to read that piece, right? It builds on that football thing, right?
Yes, sir.
That parallel
Yes,
world.
sir.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
yeah.
And I love how you mentioned the whole idea of all of these kings without a kingdom,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
So you have
Yeah.
like 15 kings fighting for the same kingdom, same corner of the block, right? And so they're trying to top each other. And I said that's a volatile mix to
Yeah.
drop people in something. You said now fend for this,
Yes.
you know, on your own,
Yes.
and then you invite police to regulate that, right? When that happens, and you kind of and you invite other stuff into it.
Yeah.
And there's a poem in here that I think you'll also enjoy, because folks always ask me about the title if I misspelled clinched, right? And it says, shouldn't it be with an E? Did you make a mistake? And I still get that question, and I never get it. Never gets old because I love answering it, right? And I said, yes, clinch is with an E, but the word clinched with an I is borrowed from boxing, right? And it is when two boxers are engaged in this clinch, right? And you can tell they're tired,
Together.
but
Yeah.
they're still jabbing and they're still throwing a little bit, right? And this can go on for like many rounds, right? Two heavyweights. And I said I use that because it is a boxing term for all the stuff that I described. Like, so you had retired boxers who cannot survive outside of the ring because so they're looking for Mike Tyson is a perfect example, right? And so it's kind of like now if you in real life now you're saying people are grappling with these fights. What do they do when they're not doing that?
Right.
Mhm.
Like, do they have day jobs, regular jobs, and so forth? So a lot of them struggle because they used to play King of the Mountain. So it's not like now they have to create their own sort of sense of fight or purpose within that, and without a guide, they get lost in that shuffle. So I love the depiction of that because it is what do you do now when you're not grappling with that, right? And no one tells you what happens when you actually survive.
It's
What
true.
happens? Everyone is playing, oh, I'm not going to live long enough, so I'm just going to go all out.
Right.
But
Right.
what happens when you survive, right? And that's why for me it was important. When I survived, I knew I was inside of my hand. I knew I wanted to be a great dad. I knew I wanted to still be this, this wonderful person, right? The man that I was destined to be, right? And to even use poetry and my words to be able to reach people, like all that would have been lost without having that vision, right? And so in a lot of ways, I'm hoping to guide people in that way, but I'm also hoping that you send that poem out somewhere. If it hasn't
Yeah.
been published, to send that out somewhere because or read it as often as you can too, so that other people get that because it's exactly what you mentioned. Our experiences overlap more than we think. And it doesn't matter what, and I found it doesn't matter what skin color or even gender. A lot of people relate to a lot of the things that I talk about because they've been through it.
I
They've
was
been
thinking the
through
Yeah.
same thing about you, man. I was thinking that you need to be on tour somewhere where you're talking
Mhm.
to troubled youth to let them know
Yeah.
that what you've been through and kind of give them a reflection of what could happen to them if they're in the wrong place at the wrong time. Lord knows, man, I could tell stories about my drug addiction and the stuff I went through, and only to come to find out that all the excitement I was trying to find, all the gangsters and the lifestyle and all that stuff, all I really wanted, man, was to find some peace in my own skin.
Yes.
Mhm.
It's like,
Mhm.
wow, now I'm a square. I don't go nowhere. I ain't out there no more. But I'm okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I feel
Mhm.
fed tonight.
I do too.
So
I do
I
too.
feel full. Usually I come to deliver, but this is like one of
Uh,
those um
yeah.
those parties you go to and you walk out with Tupperware, right?
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
people give you something, those parties like, no, you got to take something home. You're like, I'm good. They're like, no, we insist.
I'm
And
telling you, I'm telling you, I
yeah,
agree. I feel like I've been with my cousins tonight, right? Like,
yes,
like
it does feel
we
family.
sat
It
around.
does.
No, it feels family.
We
It's like we
we
sat around
are
and
we are
told some stories
we
and,
are your family.
Yes,
yeah.
I love that.
I mean, everybody, right? This was a beautiful. I feel so blessed to have come in here tonight. So thank you, Bernardo. Thank you, Enzo. Thank you, Elizabeth.
You.
And all of you guys. This was for me, it was very cathartic. So I'm grateful.
okay, Enzo. On that note, if nobody else wants to read anything, I'm going to ask that you give me a closing poem. If you got one in the clinch book, good. If you got to go to a different book, we don't care. I want to hear what you got to say, man, because you have been blessed. And the way I see things, man, I see us. I got a poem called I can't think of the title of it, but it basically says that we poets, God chose us to be poets. Because God is the master guy who's in the human resource business, right? This one over here is going to be a musician. This one's going to be a swimmer. This one's going to play basketball. And this one is going to be a poet because I need a place to put my words. I need somebody on the earth to go through various experiences and tell other people what they've experienced to help them get through things. Help them things that see that they're not alone in their journey. They also have experience and they came through. So you, my brother, definitely one who was chosen to do this thing. So I know you got something in that bag, man.
I do. So I'll read you a poem that is it's actually a new piece from my current manuscript, which is currently being reviewed by a publisher, and it's really an evolution, right? From, you know, we talk about childhood and everything else, but this one is a piece titled American Testimony. And it was recently published in Bear Review. And a lot of times you see headlines, and it really delves into the title in the manuscript is American Scapegoat. And it was sort of like it talks about how certain folks are scapegoated and blamed for certain things. But at the same time, there's like this rich history of being invisible, right? And I talked about how often as a black man feeling invisible in society where I'm not making headlines in the way that people are comfortable with, and usually that means trouble, right? And so what do you make of someone like me? How do you make, you know, and I realized that my life may not have mattered to a lot of folks as much as we thought. And so it's a poem titled American Testimony. And it really chronicles how we actually assign value to lives. And so the whole debate about whether or not Black lives matter and all lives matter, I wanted to address that in a very different way from a very unique perspective. So it's a poem titled American Testimony. I wish I could write about bees and collapsed colonies, and about a young child frolicking through fields of withered posies in search of something whole and tender, with their head down and crying about the promise of all that is unseen. I wish this could be a verse about extinction and preventing lions and other wildcats from meeting the fate of a rifle's aim, and about how a broken tooth will always remind us of Cecil the lion, whose murder caused a nation to hold his head down and cry. I wish I were writing about a beach whale or a pack of sea lions who mistook the sand for stardust or heavenly grounds, and how a village of strangers nursed and ushered them back to the sea, watching, arm on shoulder, heads down and crying. I wish what was written was about a rare moth that once made a dilapidated shack its home, and how it was spared minutes before demolition, and how it was the man who built the shack that discovered it, and how he held his head down and cried. Instead, I am writing in hope that you will care about my early demise, enough to be moved by how often I find myself on my knees and wailing under a dilapidated sun, and how your head is often constantly held down so you don't ever have to see me die.
Wow.
So thank you. You're the first folks to hear me read that poem, and it kind of gave me some chills reading that. So thank you for being that wonderful audience. And it felt safe enough to read it. That's why I chose this group, because it felt safe enough to read this piece. So thank you.
Gave me chills too. Wow.
That's one to take me home with, man. That's a beautiful piece, man.
Thank you.
Thank you, Enzo. We're delighted that you chose us.
I appreciate you having me. So thank you.
And I want to give a shout out to Jennifer, who invited you. I don't know the backstory or how she found you, but I'm glad she found you and invited
you. We met
you.
on Instagram, I think. So we connected over some poetry, which was
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I've got your email address myself, brother, so I'll be in touch, you know.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Anybody else would like to be in touch with Enzo, this would be the time to let him know that you're interested. In the chat, I think some people joined us late. In the
Yeah.
chat, he left a notation about where to get purchase his book. But I have, like I said, I have his information. So if you missed it and you know me, then hit me up and I'll let you know. 'Cause I'll be getting my copy, you know. And
I just sent you some love, Enzo, because you just gave us some love tonight. So I'm just
I,
like, wow.
I appreciate it, Patty. Thank you.
Ooh.
and
I
Wow.
Enzo,
have folks in the DC area, so that's what my
Okay.
poetry family is. So
Cool.
so yes.
Well, I'm doing a thing for the Baltimore County Arts Guild now, where I think everybody on here knows that I do these book talks and have various poets come in, talk about their books. So if you're in the DMV, I got to get you over there. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
this has just been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bernardo, thank you.
Thank you, Bernardo, for brilliant hosting. Appreciate it.
welcome, my brother. You're welcome.
Thank you,
Anytime.
Bernardo.
All right. So everybody, I'm gonna say good night. Let me turn this thing off. Captured everything, and at some point in time, if you want to relive it, it'll be back there for you to relive.